author of 7 novels, including Why We Broke Up, We Are Pirates, All the Dirty Parts, and Bottle Grove. His new book on writing, And Then, What Else?, has been published by Liverlight W.W. Norton in 2024. As Lemony Snicket, he's responsible for numerous books for children, including the 13-volume A Series of Unfortunate Events, the 4-volume All the Wrong Questions, and The Dark, which won the Charlotte Zolotow Award. Mr. Snicket's first book for readers of all ages, Poison for Breakfast, was published by Liverlight W.W. Norton in 2021. Mr. Handler has received commissions from the San Francisco Symphony, Berkeley Repertory Theater, and the Royal Shakespeare Company, and has collaborated with artist Myra Coleman on a series of books for the Museum of Modern Art in New York, along with musicians Stephen Merritt, Benjamin Gibbard, Colin Malloy, and Torkel Campbell. He's sold more than 70 million copies of his books, like a number I can't even wrap my head around, and has been translated into 40 different languages. His books have been adapted for film, stage, and television, including the recent adaptation of A Series of Unfortunate Events, for which he was awarded both the Peabody and Writers Guild of America awards. He lives in San Francisco with the illustrator Lisa Brown, to whom he's married and whom he's collaborated on several books, and one son. Daniel Handler is joined by Chanan Tigay in conversation today. Chanan Tigay is an award-winning writer and journalist who's covered the Middle East, 9/11, and the United Nations for numerous magazines, newspapers, and wires. Author of The Lost Book of Moses, The Hunt for the World's Oldest Bible, published by Echo HarperCollins. Tigay recently was featured talent in the 2-hour History Channel special, The God Code. Born in Jerusalem, Mr. Tigay holds degrees from Columbia University and the University of Pennsylvania, was an investigative reporting fellow at UC Berkeley, and is professor of creative writing at San Francisco State University. He recently spent a year at Harvard as a fellow of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Please join me in welcoming Daniel Handler and Chanan Tigay to the Magnus.
Hello. Thank you for that introduction. I love having my bio read after Daniel Handler's. Even my mother would have to admit that it's not quite.
Well, that's more than my mother would admit, so I think.
Maybe they can talk. Welcome everyone, good afternoon. It's very nice to see everyone here, so many friendly faces in the audience. I would be remiss, I'm gonna say this at the beginning so I don't forget. Please, if you are not yet signed up for the Jay's newsletter, you must sign up for it, jweekly.com, get all sorts of wonderful news about the Bay Area Jewish community every day in your inbox. With that said, I don't have a question about that.
Okay, I don't have anything to add to that either.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, whose inbox could not use more emails?
That's exactly correct.
Always so lonely when you refresh and you have just a couple of petitions to sign.
I'm glad we've cleared that up earlier in the discussion. Now, we heard your latest book mentioned, and then What Else, which is, you know, essentially a memoir about your relationship with books. So essentially what it really is a book about books, and this strikes me as, if not uniquely Jewish, then certainly quintessentially Jewish.
Yeah, it's pretty Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, can you talk about how you imagine being a Jew has impacted you both as a writer and a human being?
A lot. Next question. No.
Moving on.
Yeah. I grew up here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, which is a suburb of Berkeley over to the west, and I grew up with a large Jewish family who we were all very close emotionally, but not close on the family tree. In fact, it was many years before I learned this as a child, and that was because we were the ones who got out. And that, I think, was an enormous shaping of my own worldview, not only the specificity of Jewish culture, but I think just kind of narratively, that the stories that were told around the table when I was growing up were about who made it and who didn't make it, and like all stories of such, it's not the story of a meritocracy, which is often the temptation of certainly of children's literature. So, you know, it is not that the smartest people or the prettiest people or the kindest people or the cleverest people made it. It was just who made it. And I think that made the stories scary and more exciting. And so I think to be armed with that knowledge early feels very Jewish to me. And I think when you then, if you have a Jewish education, you start hearing stories that our people have told for longer than my individual family was telling it, and those are similarly full with the chaos of, well, you don't really know what happened, that was sure a close call, or that didn't work out at all. And I think that was that was what I gained from it the most, was that you were not rewarded for good behavior. That always feels Gentile to me. It isn't necessarily, but I think that was what I learned, was the chaos of life in kind of refutation of easy narrative.
You know, and you speak in the book about jaunts to the library with your father, who did survive.
Yeah.
And you say the books he would take out from the library were of two genres. One were spy novels,
yeah,
and the other was, I guess, nonfiction about the Holocaust.
Yes.
And that seems to me to be two different purposes for literature. One is escapism, the spy novels, and the other is something else. Did that influence your approach to understanding what the purpose of writing is?
Oh gosh. Well, first let's figure out the purpose of writing, and then I can figure out whether that's where I learned it. No, I think I watched my father going over something that was difficult to grasp, and I actually think in his mind the spy novels were in fact not necessarily escapism, although I think he relaxed with them, but I think was part of the chewing over of kind of international intrigue and breathtaking escape. I think that was all part of it. But I mean, I think what I learned the most from going to the library with my father all the time was that going to the library, checking out books and having books near you was just the way one lived. And so, you know, I brought a book with me here. I don't anticipate getting a lot of reading done on it, but I always have one. Why wouldn't you have a book nearby? And actually, I almost brought two books because I'm almost done with this book. So I had the feeling of like, what if I finish this book and then I don't have a book with me at the book place where I'm going? What am I going to do then? And so I camped out in Hannah Weisman's office for a few minutes before this began, which of course is lined with books. And so I got even less reading done than I might have, because I was looking at the spines of books and figuring out what might be in such an office. So I think that's what I learned most from the library, was what a necessity it is alongside what a luxury it is.
Yeah, I mean, and it's clear from what you just said and everything that you write in the book that you've had a deep and intimate relationship with books from the time you were a very young child. And it seems to me like, you know, being a writer for you is almost a very natural extension of that reading. And I'm wondering if being a writer, and a very successful one at that, is what you imagined it would be when you thought about it as a young person.
Oh, I mean, what I wanted to be as a young person was part of the excitement of reading. I wanted to make up stories, I wanted to be a writer, but I think part of that was just to be kind of in that game. And my parents were loving and supportive of me, certainly, but they made it clear that you probably were not going to get to make a living as a writer. That's not usually how it works out. But being around books was, you know, they said, oh, well, there are lots of people who think that they're going to be a big writer, and then they end up being around books. You can be teaching, you can be doing all these things, so they kind of helped me understand that. But for me, that was always kind of part of the way. was that I wanted to be near literature, that I wanted to be in the stuff of it. And that's the most fulfilling part of what I do. And when I talk with other writers, I think particularly writers who might be lost in one way or another with the frustration of making a living, I always try to say, like, you're not going to find your solace by your career going well. There's fun stuff that happens if your career goes well, but it's full of anxiety and work, like anyone's career. And then also, this is kind of as glamorous as it gets. If you're a successful writer, it means you get to go into a room where other nerdy people who can barely leave the house because they want to read, come to listen to you. This is the apex of being a successful writer. There's not a champagne room you get to go to. This is it. And so if you can't be sustained by literary conversation and reading, you should get out of it. This is all we got. And so I think that was always on my mind, was how do I get to be a part of it? And I think when you're young, which is where the memoir starts, unsurprisingly, you have that very permeable membrane if you are loving a book. You were reading a novel probably when you're young, and you think, what if I were the hero of that book, or if the hero had a friend, and that's sort of me, and you might kind of walk around, or when you take a bath, or go to school with this thought, this kind of story going on in your head that you keep changing, that's taken from books that you read and nudged into place by something you saw on television or something like that, that you have that feeling. And I think that's a very beautiful feeling. And it gets harder to chase down when you're an adult because you have to do all these things. But I think to me, that's really the deep joy of literature. And this book began because Norton was doing a new translation of Baudelaire, of The Flowers of Evil, and they asked if I would write something about it. And so I wrote about going to the library with my father when I was 12, and that I saw a book called The Flowers of Evil. And I thought, that sounds good. And I took it home, I didn't even know, why would I open it? It was obviously a horror novel about evil flowers. Who doesn't want to see that? So I took it home and I opened it up, and it was, full of the strange, lonely, desperate poetry of Baudelaire, and about loose women and drugs and liquor and feeling lonely. And that last one was the only one that I'd experienced. And the book kind of unnerved me and frightened me. I took it back to the library, I went back and I got it out, and I participated like that. But, one of the puzzles when I think of myself at that age was that a puzzle for me about The Flowers of Evil was that after being in English and very strange for a while, just switched to French, which I could not read. And I found that very irritating from an author that he would do that. Well, spoiler alert, it's a translation from the French, and that's clearly marked in the edition. I own the edition that I got now out of the library, and it's not like they neglected to mention that, but I was that young reader who every page that isn't the book is like skipping introduction, what's that, And so I didn't read the thing that said, and the original poems are in French in the back. And just to think of my own mind trying to grasp what these poems were saying, completely inappropriate poems, and then when I didn't even have the sense to know what suddenly switching into French might mean. And that kind of space feels part of the liminal space that we're talking about with literature. And for me, that's the really attractive part. That's the magic part.
You said something interesting about when you're talking to writers who are sort of lost in one way or another. In the book,
which is all of them, by the way. Just want to make that clear.
So, which is right. Which is to say, talking to writers. You talk in the book about a college professor and her husband, who really were not only wonderful teachers, but it seems to me amazing mentors to you as a young writer. And I wonder if you can talk for a minute about sort of mentorship in the arts. It sounds like that experience you had is something you try to bring to your interactions with other writers. Can you talk about the value for you coming up as a writer, and then how you try to sort of pay it forward?
Yeah, I mean, when I got to college, I knew I wanted to be a writer. There was a famous writer who was teaching a class. You had to submit, work to get into it and have an interview with her. So I submitted some work. I'd written a couple of stories and some poems, and I met with her. She was very mean to me. She said that my credentials were very unimpressive, which was embarrassing. But kind of the older I get, the more I think, I was 18. I don't know, like the New Yorker hadn't come knocking on my door yet. And I don't know what kind of credentials other 18-year-olds were submitting to her, but from her manner, I would guess she was mean to everyone. And then she said, I'll let you in the class, and I'm going to assign you a poem to memorize, and then on the first day of class, we're going to meet in a field, and we're all going to recite these poems. And I thought, I guess I didn't want to be a writer. I didn't know you had to do that. I thought the reason to memorize a poem would be obviously to seduce women. That's the only reasonable reason that you would memorize a poem. And so I didn't take her class. Got an enemy for life. She's still mad at me. And I met another writer who I'd never heard of. Her name is Kit Reed. She is no longer with us, and she was a huge mentor to me. And her writing class was, you turned in 10 pages a week, and you met in her kitchen alone with her for 15 minutes, and she talked with you. And that sounded good to me. That's what I wanted to write. I didn't want to do whatever you do in a field with a bunch of other students reciting things. That didn't sound fun to me. I was keen enough to take the last time slot. So sometimes I got invited to dinner. It's hard to imagine now, but I was very skinny then. And I think it was the subject of concern that maybe I should stay for dinner. But I was welcomed into this world of her and her husband, who was an American Studies professor. He taught film and literature. And they just sat around talking about things that they liked and talking about how things like that were made. And many former students paraded through their things, some of whom were very visible artists, some of whom were, I would say artistically successful, but invisible to the general world. And they were all complaining because they were artists. That's how that works. And that was really magic, to be part of a fellowship of making things that was unconcerned with that kind of mythology of memorizing a poem to stand in a field, and was more interested in, let's all work and see what is done. And her attention to my own work was individual. So she would say, it looks like you're trying to do this. How much Muriel Spark have you read? That was often what she would say, is how much have you done this, instead of, I bet you've never done it. And so she had me, one of the early things is she said, why don't you read a couple Muriel Spark novels, and by next week, and we'll come back and we'll talk to them. And I went to the library and I ran into another student, and I said, oh, I hope we're not both gonna reach for the same Muriel Spark book. But he had been recommended something else, because that's how she worked, was that she tried to figure out what books might help the individual. And that's something that, I can't really pretend to be a mentor. I don't work in an academic setting. And so, I don't have undergraduates coming to find me. I don't know how that would work. Be a little creepy. But when I try to find fellowship with other writers and recommend, if somebody's stuck on something, that we'll try to think of together who does it well, which I think is part of the glory of participating in the literary tradition, is that you're not the first one to do anything. Lots and lots of people have done it before. And it's fun to be reminded of that constantly and to go back and find those books.
Yeah, and I think that message comes through strongly in the book, which is that if you want to be a good writer, you first got to be a good reader. And I appreciate that very much. And I think among other things, the book seems to me to be an argument in favor of ennui which you describe in the book as a fancy French way of saying bored, or maybe being bored.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm curious, in a day and age where the minute anyone feels remotely bored, pull out their phone, pull out their iPad, you don't have to ever be bored for a second. What is beneficial about ennui, about being bored?
Well, I think when your mind has nothing right on the plate to chew on, then it can wander a little bit and find things that you didn't know, and it will return to other things that you've forgotten or that have been on your mind anyway. But yeah, that just feels like the best. I was actually just talking a couple nights ago. I had dinner with a friend of mine who has small children, and somebody gave them like a video game console. It was the first video game console in the household, so they made up a rule that you can only use it on Saturdays. He's not Jewish, and he's okay though, you know. And he just said, yeah, on the day when they don't use it, I see my children making a cardboard box into a robot and going outside and finding these things, you know, doing kind of the stuff of imagination. And when they have this console, then they're just kind of shooting aliens and leaping over cars all the time. And you know, everybody has their mindless entertainment from time to time, so I don't want to sound super conservative on that front. But yeah, I think being bored I like being bored. I like that feeling.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I'm going to be on a plane. That'll be perfect. It'll be really boring.
You know, the arts are a form of expression, and you are an artist in multiple genres, right? When you read your bio, you write in multiple genres, first of all. Impressive enough. But also you're a musician, a playwright, a screenwriter, and I'm curious if there are things you can express in one genre that you can't express in another. Are there things you can do in one genre that you can't do in others? You know, I guess the question is, why tell one story as a book and one as a play and one in the form of a song?
I mean, the short answer is because I get interested in that. I just think, oh, this will be fun, let's do this. The thing that has caused me, I would say, the most trouble in my professional life is that I say to myself, how hard could it be? It's pretty hard, is usually the answer. But yeah, I think prose is what I write the most. I think it's what comes most naturally to me, and it's necessarily isolating. I have a couple writer friends, and we will work together, like parallel play. We'll sit at a table in a cafe or in a library, and we're all working on our things. And you know, I might do this for 10 days in a row with a friend of mine and not know anything about what's going on in their life because we are hardly having a conversation. And with all those other art forms, you get people in right away. That's kind of the only way to do it. And I'm working on a theater piece now. That's why I will get on a plane tomorrow and I will see some actors, and then there's this kind of magical headache of working with actors on a theater thing where you have to get them to do it well enough to learn that it's your fault that it's not working. You know, because at first you're like, oh, don't say it like that, say it in these magic ways, you know, and then they say it and you're like, it's my fault then. Thanks for coming, actors. And that's it's a whole different part of the brain. It's very magical. The music that I play in the service of, I work for other people who are really doing the real music. And I think that's great too, because I get to not be in charge, because most of my professional life, I'm the guy. And so then it's kind of nice to just have to wait my turn and do my little thing and get it edited out 9 times out of 10. Turns out we didn't need you, handler. It's a nice feeling.
Yeah, you know, you talk about parallel play. My wife is a fiction writer. We work near each other all the time and shout out our brilliant lines as we're writing them. You and your wife actually work together on a number of projects. And I'm curious what that's like.
Well, I love my wife very much, so that works out pretty well. And mostly what we've worked on together are picture books. It is a little bit of a similar process where I write a manuscript that gets her to draw the things that are in the manuscript so that they don't have to be words in the manuscript. So as the manuscript gets shorter and shorter, I know we're working well. And yeah, but I mean, I would say it feels a little like parallel play too, because she goes to her studio and does it, and she comes back. She's a brutally honest person in general, and so she's great to give a first draft to because she will not sugarcoat her opinion. And so that works pretty well in a collaboration too. You have to get to a point where you can be that way with someone. You can't do it with people right away. But we've been together for 1,000 years now. So.
Yeah, and that kind of feedback is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
In the book you say that loneliness is at the heart of literature. And I found that arresting because I always thought it was the opposite, which is that literature was supposed to make you feel less alone. And maybe these are really the same thing or two sides of the same coin, but I'm wondering if you can explain what you mean by loneliness being at the heart of literature.
Well, I think it's made in isolation. I think when anyone here who is a writer knows that feeling of like there's something you want to get down on paper and no one else cares about it as much as you do and never will. And so you make your thing and you have this corner of your mind where you're always thinking about it to some extent. And it's hardly a thought you can share often until it's really down on paper. And then I think, for the most part, that's how reading works. Not when you're small, maybe, when someone's reading to you and you have those beautiful nights in the company of another person reading. But I mean, for the most part, you're reading at whatever pace you want, whatever you want, and you're doing it alone. Even if you're in a book club or something, the act of appreciating it is alone. And I think that's lonely, but I mean, I think lonely has a tincture of being bad. I think it's good for you to be lonely. We're surrounded by people all the time. So I think you don't want to be lonely all the time, but I think you want to be lonely sometimes, and I think literature offers that.
Yeah. You speak in the book about creating our own canon. So, there's a traditional canon, there's Moby Dick and Shakespeare and all that.
I heard of those guys. Yeah.
Did they sell 70 million copies of their books?
Yeah, that's for sure how to line up the successful arcs and copies sold.
Yeah, but when you suggest that we create our own canons, you don't necessarily mean a list of books that are the most significant to us, but actually the moments in books, turns of phrase and plot twists that are in some way significant. And I'm wondering if you could take us through a bit of your own canon in that regard, the moments and turns of phrase and plot twists in books, specific books that have been most impactful to you as a writer.
I mean, it's a long question, but a long answer to the question. That was a long question. But I mean, I think that there's such a mythology that's placed on top of literature that you are tempted to forget that the heart of it is enthusiasm. What you like is what you like. And that the books, the reason why everyone is here in a room talking about books is because at some point you were handed a book that you really loved, and that made you read another one, and you made it read another one, and made you read another one. And before you know it, you were lost. And I think that for writers, I try to encourage them to seek out what they're enthused by. And of course, part of it is that you have to read everything because you don't know what you're enthused by. But when you found things that you're enthused by, to then when you're a writer, I don't think you have to do this if you're not a writer, you figure out what it is that you really, really like. What is that? Instead of just, gosh darn it, Toni Morrison is sure a great writer, that you think, what is it about Beloved that I return to, that I think about all the time? And that then, which is one of the magic things about it being books as opposed to other collaborative art forms where the inspiration can be hard to pinpoint, it's all there on paper. So then you can go back and find that scene and look at it and study it for what it is that you're trying to do, what you're trying to take from it. And I think that that's what Kit Reed really taught me to do. Let's read some Mariel Spark and figure out how that's paced and how that might help you countlessly. I will think about it because I just went by it. But close to my house in San Francisco is what used to be a hospital. It's now condos, like everything else in San Francisco. But it is a hospital that, among other things, is the site of the movie Vertigo. Part of Vertigo was filmed at the hospital, so I love to go by it and think about it. And there's a scene where poor Jimmy Stewart has been through the ringer, and so he's taking some time in a mental hospital, and his long-suffering girlfriend, Barbara Del Geddes, who knows deep in her heart that her boyfriend loves Kim Novak more, gives up on him. She's playing Mozart for him. He's in like a wheelchair and he looks haggard, and she walks down the hallway, this hallway that I drive by all the time, and you never see her again in the movie. And that scene always struck me, but I didn't remember that you never saw her again in the movie until I was watching it for the purpose of waiting for that scene. And then I thought, oh, that's so funny. It's like she's kind of a love interest for half the movie, and then just when things have gotten too crazy, she walks out of the movie. She leaves them in an asylum, and then the movie does get even crazier. And my second novel, Watch Your Mouth, has in 2 parts, and I remember thinking, I want that thing in that movie to feel at the end of the first part of my novel, to have that feeling of like, okay, some things are gone. What in the world can happen in the second half of this story? And that was exciting to me, and I lifted that from that scene in Vertigo. And no one in a million years would think that there's nothing in the novel that reflects that plot or anything like that, but that was what it did for me. And so in writing that novel, I would say that scene in Vertigo was part of my personal canon. But that was many years ago. I've worked on a gazillion other things since, but when I'm working on something, I try to find the things, I literally put them on my desk if I can, the books and things that are most interesting to me, so I can keep thinking, oh yes, that's what I'm doing, this is what I'm taking from.
I love hearing you break it down that way. I've so often heard stuff like, oh, yeah, Hemingway would see a Picasso painting and his short story was inspired by the painting, and I never could make a one-to-one kind of relationship.
Yeah, well, it has literature has placed this irritating mythology on itself, right? You can see the horrible biopic in which Hemingway would stare at the Picasso painting. Oh, yes, and then a quick cut to type, crumple, 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 throw, right? I'm gonna type this again. No, I'm such a writer. Maybe I'll lean out of the window and smoke and look at the landscape, and then you try that when you're 22 and it's pretty fun, but you don't get anything done. You don't get any writing done. You gotta do it another way. That's not.
But one of the things I loved in the book is actually the same kind of interpretation you just gave to Vertigo, you do to children's books that you read as a young person, which you enjoyed and were meaningful to you, but you couldn't put words at that point to the way the cadences are happening in the sentences, the use of language in particular ways. But you really then, with your adult writerly eye, go back and break down those scenes in these kids' books that were really meaningful to you. And I wonder if doing that translates into your own writing books for children.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I first started writing for children, I didn't have any children, and I wasn't a child, and I didn't know any children socially. Didn't go out drinking with a bunch of children, contrary to some people's suspicions. But it was easy to find the books that I loved. I went to the library. In fact, I was embarrassed to be a grown man in the children's section of the library. It was at the Epiphany branch. I was living in New York then. It was at the Epiphany branch. It seemed magical. And I would go there, and I remember this one woman, the librarian, said to me, oh, I always see you here in the children's section. Are you a teacher? And I thought, that's probably a very good reason to be in there. So I'm going to say yes. And then with no foresight, without realizing that I was going to come back there again and again and again. So I was eventually going to have to make up a school that I taught at and to tell a few anecdotes about imaginary children. And then she got very excited when I finally thought, oh, I'll take a shortcut back to the truth. So I said, hey, I sold my novel. I'm not working as a teacher anymore. And she said, we should have a party for you when the novel is published. And I said, oh, thank you. And then I avoided her for a long time. So she never had a party because what I thought of was that my friends would go and she would say, you know, I never saw a teacher with more dedication. And they would say, teacher? That guy's not a teacher. And it was all because I was self-conscious about finding those books. But yes, I went back to them and I thought, what did I love about The Bear's Famous Invasion of Sicily? What is it about Zilpha Keely-Snyder that I think is interesting? You know, what is the pace of this? I remember I read these Italo Calvino Italian folktales when I was young. Like, what was appealing about that? And then to just try to think about that. And I think that was a really wonderful way to approach children's literature for me. And that children's literature, in the way that literature has this layer of annoying mythology on top of it, children's literature has this layer of annoying pedagogy on top of it. So if I'd gone to a children's publisher and said, boy, I'd like to write for children, teach me how, you know, they would say, well, remember, the important thing is that we want to teach children to end all of the world's major problems. So write a book that ends one of those problems. Fix the environment in a book. Kids love that, and they don't.
You know, my writing students often ask me if they need to go live in New York City when they graduate. And I know you've lived in New York. I guess it was a while back, I take it.
Yeah.
And here. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the literary community here in the Bay Area, sort of what's interesting and unique about it.
Oh, I like it here better. I mean, I like it here better, I think, in all ways, really. I wasn't not made for New York City. But I think, how can I describe it? I guess as a parallel, my son attended the School of the Arts in San Francisco for high school. And I knew some people who had their children in the School of the Arts in LA and the School of the Arts in New York. Now, New York and LA are obviously big places where entertainment can be made. So if your child is an actor in the School of the Arts in New York, when they perform in something, people associated with the industry looking for 17-year-olds to put on TV will come and see those performances. In LA, if they're making a movie, the same thing. In San Francisco, there's not the center of that industry, and so the School of the Arts didn't have that, maybe you're about to be discovered and become a rock star in any of its programming. And so that meant that I felt like the creativity just felt more kind of intuitive and led by imagination and impulse rather than kind of a professional urge. And I feel similarly that the writing community here, I'm friends with all types of writers. I bump into all types of writers, and it doesn't feel, there's no competition. I mean, there is competition, but that's not what the stuff is made of. And it's because we're not right where publishing is. So nobody's saying, oh, you're dating that woman who works at the agency. Well, maybe that'll help me. You don't have that feeling, so it feels to me that more interesting, more fun.
You hear a lot of writers talk about writing, and it really feels like they hate actually writing, pulling teeth and painful all the time. Do one gets the sense reading your books that you actually enjoy it. Is that
I
true?
do, yeah.
Why?
Well, Kit Reed, my mentor when I was finishing college, I said to her, I want you to tell me if I'm good enough to do this. And she said, that's a really stupid question. She said, what you need to do is go figure out if that's what you enjoy doing. And so she suggested, rather than say, try to go to an MFA program or something, she said, try to get a job where you have enough time and energy to write every day. And so I did. I found an office job, and I did it badly, so I had lots of energy and time. I worked answering phones at the computer science department at the City College of San Francisco. And here's a crazy coincidence. Guess who was a dean there? My mother. It's crazy. She somehow rode on my coattails and became a dean while I was a bad employee answering phones. It's crazy. But it was a half-time job, so they didn't have to give us health insurance. And I went home to my stupid apartment every afternoon, and I wrote, and I really, really loved it. That's what I like to do, was to write all day long. And I was very frustrated when Kit gave me that advice. You know, well, because first of all, I had that kind of anxiety that you get when you graduate from a school. And you think, like, what? Could someone tell me my future, please? And they can't. But also, it was a reminder that if you want to be a writer, write. That's the relationship you can have, and that's the delight that you can have. There's no, the careerist stuff will happen, or it won't, and it'll ebb and flow, and people have loved me and hated me over the years. And, but it's doing the work that is most exciting to me. So yeah, I really, really like it.
This question, it makes sense to me, but maybe it won't make sense to you. Obviously, you are Daniel Handler, you are also Lemony Snicket. Is it more fun to write as one or the other?
No, it's all fun. It's a good time. I mean, there's hard, you know, I have bad days of it, obviously, and there's frustrations that come with working on the writing, but I mean, I've had jobs and I've done this. This is better. And I really enjoy doing it, yeah.
One aspect of it you didn't seem to enjoy doing, having read the book, is working in Hollywood. There's a fabulous story where you're, after 9 drafts of a screenplay of your own work, you're called in to, I guess, fix it? And it doesn't quite work out as you planned. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's anyone who's ever heard a writer work in Hollywood. I don't know a writer who's had a good time in Hollywood. But yeah, I wrote 9 drafts of the screenplay for the Lemony Snicket movie, and then there was a big producer quit and the director was fired, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't know if I'm up for doing another draft of this. I don't think I can rewrite it again. And they said, that's so funny. We thought the same thing. We don't think you can do it. Get out of here. And I was flown down to LA to have that conversation. And it really took like 8 minutes. You know, and I was like, well, what about, okay. So I got back in the car and it took me to the Burbank airport. People have been to the Burbank airport, right? You know, it's like kind of the size of this room. And I didn't really, so I went to the bar of the Burbank airport, and I said, I was just fired from Paramount Pictures. I'm buying everybody here a drink. It was like 3 people. But one of the 3 people said, I was fired from Paramount Pictures like a few years ago. And we were like, oh, so then he bought the next round. But I mean, the delight of the movies is the danger of the business, right? Movies are fantastic. They're projected up on the wall. There's like the most beautiful people in the world. There's startling things, you know, brought to fruition, and it costs a whole lot of money. If you write down the sentence, an acrobat is carried off by hyenas, it doesn't cost anybody anything. But if you're like, this is what's happening in the movie, wouldn't that be great? They have to make all that happen, and it costs a whole lot of money, and the people who are in charge of that money act like you would if someone said, will you take this bag of $300 million, you know, and walk downtown with it? You wouldn't stop at a friend's house and chat it up. You would go immediately because you would be terrified of having that money taken from you, and they're all terrified all the time. And so they don't know what to do, so they panic a lot. And so yes, then they called me back and they said that there are these holes in the script that the other guy made. And I was like, yeah, well, you know. maybe she shouldn't have fired me. And then but they didn't, they were mean to me then too. They're just mean, yeah, they're scared. Because it's money, it's a whole lot of money to make a movie, and so that everyone's terrified of it. And everyone who works on the creative side is unhappy about that, and everybody who works on the other side is unhappy about that. But like many circumstances in which everyone is unhappy, it doesn't seem to be getting fixed anytime soon.
Would you, or have you, would do it again?
Obviously, yeah. It's really, I mean, it's fun also. And it's fun when you're used to working in isolation to work in collaboration. That part's fun. They pay you. Yeah, the writers' group health insurance is really great. I've often thought if we ever had real universal health care in this country, it'll be really interesting to see what happens to writing in television and film. Is because a lot of people do it for the health insurance. And if they didn't do it for the health insurance, they wouldn't do it. And so it's just it's a fascinating aspect of Hollywood history.
So I'd like to open the floor to a few questions from the audience. We have a microphone to go around, is it?
I'm going to take one of yours.
You're going to take one of ours. Here, you can have mine because Mr. Handler will be answering. Does anyone have questions for Daniel Handler?
Interview with Maggie Smith on the way here from San Francisco. She was saying that her favorite part of writing is revision, and I wanted to ask you what your favorite part of writing is.
Oh, revision is pretty fun. One of the things that feels like a mad luxury in my life is when I have a horrible first draft, I get it printed and bound at Kinko's usually, and then I get to walk around with it. But then I open it and it's embarrassing because it's really awful. But that part's fun. I don't know. The first draft part's fun too. I do really enjoy it. The writer Michelle T says that writing is like kindergarten. You have to make a mess, then you have to clean up, and that most people are good at one part of it. And I think cleaning up comes more naturally to me. Boy, would my wife find that hilarious that I said that. But she's at another Jewish event, so no one's at a talk. But I think I've been getting better at making a mess first. So it's fun. The first draft is fun. It feels like stone soup. You're like, let's just put all of it in it. That's great. I don't know, the dialogue will just go on for 30 pages, and then you print it and you're like, all right, not 30. Let's get it down here. I think that part, I like all of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, you've probably answered this question many, many times, and probably people have heard it, the answer. But
Okay.
I'm still wondering, how did you come up with that great name of Lemony Snicket?
So great you can't say it out loud.
Right?
Yeah, that's very Jewish too. You know who's great, but whose name we will never say? And the comparison ends there, I want to add. How did I was at that terrible office job, and I was researching my first novel, which is called The Basic Eight. It's about a girl in high school who has a crush on a boy, and he is not interested in her, and so she bludgeons him to death with a croquet mallet. It's a comedy. And after the murder, in part of the novel, the murder is kind of made hay with by media and cultural figures as what happens. And I wanted to steal from that kind of rhetoric. So I was calling at my office job various right-wing organizations, long distance, I might add. I figured my job was a grant for the city of San Francisco, which is not how the city of San Francisco felt about it, as it turned out. But I would call them, and right-wing organizations, and I would ask them to mail me their materials so that I could mock them in my novel. And I was on the phone with a woman, and she said, "Of course, I will mail you our stupid materials. What is your name?" And I thought, "Don't give me your name." And so I just said something else that wasn't my name, which was the phrase Lemony Snicket. And then there was a pause on the phone. And during the pause, I thought, all I had to do was say something that wasn't my name. That was the whole parlor game. And I said this: no one is that dumb to think that that is a real name. And then the woman from the right-wing organization said, "Is that spelled how it sounds?" And I said, "Yes." And then I said, "Read that back to me," because I had no idea how it sounded like it was spelled. Yeah, so I guess the answer is I don't know. I panicked and I said something and then I went with it. For many volumes of children's books. Hi.
Hi. Did you have an agent at the beginning, and do you have the same agent, and do they follow you around to represent you?
I love the fantasy that my agent would follow me around. She's right here. She's a little person. Yes, I've only had one literary agent so far in my life, Charlotte Sheedy. She's terrific. I do remember that she called me at that office job and said that she would represent me. It took many years to sell my first book. It took about almost 6 years to sell my first book. And it sold for the least amount of money she had ever negotiated for working fiction. Yeah, she was, but she didn't, I mean, she's a wonderful agent and we've been together for a long time and obviously things have gone well for both of us and we crack each other up and we delight each other's company, so that's nice. But she didn't follow me around. And what can I say about her? I mean, I didn't know how anything worked, really. She represented a book by the father of someone I went to high school with, is how I came to write to her. But I think when she called me on that office, we cracked each other up. And I think that was the beginning of our professional relationship. Yeah, it's been pretty great. Oh, this is the last question? Okay, because it better sum up the whole festival. I didn't realize I was the headliner, so this is like, you have to now bring a bit of Jewish wisdom and literary culture into a swirling stew that everyone will leave inspired. It's like, I can't wait till next year's festival.
I wanted to ask you about your writing and collaboration on the New American Haggadah, so it is a Jewish question.
Oh yeah, that is pretty Jewish. It doesn't get much more Jewish than the Haggadah. Yeah, so for people who don't know, it's called the New American Haggadah. It came out a few years ago. It was, the translation of the text was by Nathan Englander, a great Jewish novelist. And the whole thing was kind of shepherded by Jonathan Safran Foer, another Jewish novelist. And originally, there was a gazillion people participating. That was Jonathan's first draft. And so he asked all of these writers to write things about different moments in the story and the Seder. And then that apparently, I never saw those pieces, so I don't know what it looked like, but it didn't look like that. And then it kind of got whittled down to, we should have someone talk about politics. Jeffrey Goldberg talks about the politics of it on purpose. It wasn't that he was included in a group chat by accident. Thank you very much. And there was a rabbi who gave a spiritual thing, and they asked me to do the part for young people, which was fun. And the whole thing was And my section in particular was reviewed furiously, with furious rage, in a prominent Jewish publication, which just seemed perfect. That's what you want. You're supposed to stay up all night arguing. Yeah, but it was fun. It was a good time. The translation, I gather, is controversial, but my Hebrew, though come by honestly at the Ben Yehuda Hebrew School, is not up to the task of judging the individual translations of Haggadahs over the years. I seem to have had other things to do during that time, but I'm glad all of you, who obviously have further things to do during this time, came here to the Jewish festival so that we may speak of books as our people have done for generations. Thank you.